Hello friends, welcome. So this video is going to be about whatever you read in the description, right? Now it's about directly heated tubes versus indirectly heated tubes, and it's based on a question that I got from William. So William is one of my premium subscribers. He's in the tier on Buy Me a Coffee that is called the Builders Club, where you get direct access to me. The other two tiers are basically just general support of the channel, and believe me, every small donation makes a difference to this channel and enables me to do more experiments and especially buy components. I really want to build a reference amp, so I have two setups, one experimental and one fixed, as a reference, and which is probably going to be based on this experimental setup. So this is my new setup, and by the way, if you look at this, 6 out of the 7 tubes are now directly heated. Previously it was 5 out of 7. So the driver tube has changed from an 8532W, which is the driver also used in the dialing amp. I changed it then to an EL33, which is a lovely tube and a bit darker, especially compared to the 8532. And now I'm using a Type 47 directly heated tube. So in answering this question whether DHTs are superior to indirectly heated tubes, I've actually redone the work again. I've done it many times, but this setup lended itself well to the same amp design, the same topology, the same number of stages, so I could make a good comparison. So, you know, I'm sort of joking here, but it's like that's the level of work we put in here in this channel, right? Anyway. Here goes William's question, and then in answering the question, I'm going to go to several. I'm going to give you the short answer, why DHTs are better. I'm going to give you a list of things that are important on the amp level, and what makes the better amp, regardless of you whether you use the best tubes. I'm going to talk about a little bit how your preferences influence which compromises you're going to make. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sound quality changes that happened here. And I'll also probably mention things about our hearing system that I think everybody should know about, that is in speaker building or amp building, and how that relates to what DHTs do well. So here goes the question. Oh, and by the way, I'm also going to scrutinize Chat GTP, because William, when he asked the question, he also, before that he asked me, he actually went to Chat GPT and he asked, and basically Chat GPT has scraped the internet of opinions of people that speak about DHTs and made a summary. So I'm going to scrutinize the words from that Chat GPT has found on the internet, and we're going to scrutinize that. So those are the things you can expect in this video. I hope you find that interesting. It'll be a bit longer video, by the way. Sorry about that, but there's just too much ground to cover to do this properly and in depth, and not make it a shallow, stupid video. So here we go. Hello Edward. I'm still curious about DHT versus IDHT sound, especially if they're worth the effort for driver tubes. Now, sorry William, in my email to you that I did before, I didn't really answer the driver tube part. I just gave you generic spiel with many elements to it, but I'm going to more specifically hone in on that as well. And of course, that's what I did here in the amp. So William writes further, this is Chat GTP's response to the comparison, and he asks, is that also what you have found? So let's look at Chat GTP's answer. It said here, many listeners claim that DHT-based stages sound more transparent and immediate, with subtle microdynamics and nuance that they feel indirectly heated tubes tend to obscure. The directly heating element is described as giving a kind of see-through clarity and lifelike tonality, especially on vocals and acoustic instruments. So that's a large part of the music. Best regards, William. So William, let's just start to answer this. Now, the short answer is this. Yes, DHTs also in especially I would say in driver positions, are generally superior to indirectly heated tubes. And in my experience, so these are my findings that you asked for, I would say, first of all, they sound less reproduced. I find them to be far more natural, having the timbre and the uniqueness, the personality of instruments come better. I also find that vocals are more personable. There's just a little bit more nuance and feel I find in them. Again, less reproduced and therefore a little bit closer to you, and it's just a bit easier to engage with. Yeah, so that are the positives on that. Now, that difference comes out most when you have premium components. So the less quality your power supply, your interstage, your output transformer, your coupling caps or something, or your volume control, your wiring, your speaker. These things need to be on a higher, with the higher quality components that you have, the more sense these start to make. For example, my last speaker, based on the Altec 414, was, compared to the Altec 515, was much sluggisher, needed more dynamic output from the tubes to overcompensate its a bit slow nature. And I couldn't hear, for example, when I replaced the Landau with a Chinese built amorphous core interstage, I couldn't hear, so I heard a little bit of difference. But in this case, I heard the shortcomings of that amorphous interstage. So, and it's limiting what I can, is probably limiting what this tube can do. Because I just can tell. And being able to tell is because I've got higher quality components all around. So the short is this difference between DHTs increases as your components and everything you use gets better. As your system gets better, they make more and more sense. If they're on a low level, you might be disappointed with its extra performance. Also, I think actually, in answer to your question, the number 3 thing is, I think it actually makes more sense generally, and I'm going counter what you see in reality often. Most people have a indirectly heated drivers and then a directly heated tube on the output. But I've also seen amps, and they're very rare, where, for example, the first stage is a DHT and then it's followed by a high mu indirectly heated triode or pentode as tried. For example, say a type 47 coupled to an EL38 or something like that. Maybe an 826 or an 830B, but they require very good drivers. But something like that you might expect. So where you have because DHTs are not available in high amplification, so you leave the high amplification to the last stage, because see, if you have 2 stages and the last stage is a DHT which has all these superior transparent qualities, but your driver throws all that detail away, there's no point in sending it to the DHT. So having a DHT in a driver position makes a lot of sense in a way, because you're not chucking it away here. Your amplification, you have the amplification of a very pure signal, and then it goes to the indirectly heated tube. So when the signals are larger, you use the more crude instrument to do that part of the amplification, to do the power delivery to the speakers. So that makes a lot of sense, I would say. Dynamic contrast. Now, if this is in your preferences, and this is still, by the way, my short answer, if you like dynamic contrast and lifelike dynamics, a bit in that field direction, there's more to it, but then you might consider 2 types of tubes. One is transmitter tubes, which also are available as directly heated sometimes. They're rare, but they're there. These are actually transmitter tubes. The 4P1L, which I've got 4 of here. And high mu tubes, so tubes with a high amplification factor. So like some builders even use the first stage with a mu of 100. So effectively that will go down to 60, 65 or so. But because those tubes are so eager to amplify, they have such a sensitivity to the incoming signal they tend to track the music really well. And so if that becomes a part of your listening desires, you appreciate that effect, look at transmission tubes, and you might actually make because you're always making compromises, and the limited amplification, you might actually choose for something that is high amplification, or a transmitter tube with reasonable high amplification factors, that in your compromise with that listening preference, you will actually choose that. And it's a good compromise because you're getting those facets that you're looking for. And you're losing some of the directly heated qualities, but that's okay, because you always make compromises, and because with that preference you will swing. I think you'll see it more swing towards transmitter and high mu tubes, while if you, for example, a more timbre oriented, like you're a classic musician, you choose your instruments on personality, timbre, on their tonality, their overall feel that fits to your playing style. If you appreciate those aspects, I think you will end up with DHTs a bit more. Now, final thing, for DHTs to have the same quality as those transmitter tubes, you need a very good driver. So here I'm using a power tube to drive the power tubes. That gives a lot more authoritative and dynamic quality that than a lower than a higher plate resistance thing. So when I swapped from the 8532 to this one, this is about a third of the plate resistance. So and the current is about 3 times higher. So this is able to drive these tubes far more with far more authority. Has no problem dealing with a little bit of grid current. So this is where so what I'm saying here is that when you want to accomplish the same effect with DHT, you better get the driving part spot on, have a very good power supply, have very good current delivery with low losses, drive them quite solidly, and then you get some of the dynamic impact that you normally would associate maybe with transmitter tubes and high mu tubes. It's very Sakuma-san-like. Now then, before I'm going to scrutinize Chat GPT with its words and its impressions about the qualities of DHTs, I want to actually go to a higher level, which is the amp level. And I'm going to list 4 points. And they're actually stolen or borrowed. Let's say borrowed. They borrowed from Thorsten Loesch. He's a very well-known designer. I respect him a lot. He was especially active on forums, I think from about 1999 to 2013. He's still around. He was a designer of AMR. He was also the brains and executive, I think, for a while from behind the i5 brand. So he's a very good designer. And what he did is he looked at the amps that he found in the world that sounded the best, and he saw 4 types of qualities that he thought they all have in common. And these amps vary a lot, like in 3 stages, 4 stages, 2 stages, cap coupled, interstage coupled, direct coupled, like cathode follower driven output tubes, like the whole gamut was there. So he compared them, but he found 4 things, and I'm gonna sort of read them out now to you, and I'll put them on the screen again. So he said, all things being equal, right? He said, the amp, this is the number 1. The amp with the least number of stages, or the simpler the amp is, the better sounding the amp is. That was his number 1 finding. The number 2 finding is, this relates to DHTs, especially in the power output stages. The best sounding amps, everything being equal, because with the same number of stages and so on, but and this is, by the way, because of the DHT, all DHTs, the grid starts conducting when you're nearing the 0 volt, when you're nearing positive territory already before the grid starts conducting. So the number 2 finding that he had was that the best amps had a very low DC resistance between the grid of the output tube or of the DHT to ground. So grid to ground DC resistance was very low. So that means it could get read. It had a very stable operating point. So that current could go somewhere. And normally, basically, you get this with amps that, pragmatically speaking, actually have a what is it? An LC connection. So instead of a grid resistor, you have a grid inductor. You get it with interstage, so that's very easy to accomplish. And you can also get it with direct coupling, but that's tricky. You have to do it very well. Then number 3, the most linear device, and I would include actually the least lossy device, the lossy components, and the most linear components will sound the best. So DHTs in this respect are very linear, and they also have very little information loss. And the same, you have to look in premium components to have minimal loss of things. This is very important. It might actually be higher on the list. Probably is. And the 4th thing that he found was having a low impedance drive. So now I want to discuss and scrutinize ChatGPT's wording. So what ChatGPT said in the question was actually, I'll put it on screen so you can see it, but I'll make it bold here. So more transparent. And this is related to basically William saying, what are those your findings? So let's talk about these words, because words normally describe our perception. So, because what the perception of people was scraped together by ChatGPT, and I want to scrutinize and give you my opinion, but also a bit of nuance around these words. And it also ties into our hearing system, our auditory system, or the human auditory system. So here, it says it's more transparent. And now I have got a bit of problem with this word, because transparent can be, I don't know. Is it more transparent? Yes, I find the DHTs more having higher resolution and more nuance. And it just seems that detail flows very naturally. So is it more transparent? Yes. In another sense, I can also say that my overwhelming experience is that it feels less reproduced. And in a way, of course, what we want from our audio systems, in some ways, if you don't consider reproduction an art, then what you want is just to hear the source in the best possible manner, or in the most enjoyable manner. Now, transparency in the sense that it doesn't feel reproduced, so you're not listening to your equipment, but you're listening to the music itself, that in transparent makes a lot of sense. It's not the word that I would pick, but hey. Now, then it says, and immediate. Now, this I find the most questionable one, because immediate, I would say this is just a minor factor, because not in our experience, and I'll get into why. There's a lot of science out there, and there's some very good research that I'm going to share now. But immediate means, that it's also direct. It maybe has more presence. It is directed at you. It is in close proximity. It feels proximity. And yes, with DHTs, I find that because of the higher level of nuance that comes through, it sometimes feels, especially with vocals, I find that it is more closer to you. It's easier to engage with it. However, to my experience now, and it's maybe because I'm influenced, because, brainwashing, but also facts and knowledge interfere with your perception. So the more brainwashed you are, the less able you are to do perception. So how I now see immediate is the effect that, maybe we all been probably in a lecture theater, or that somebody was talking, and if they're talking to you and they're in your immediate vicinity, they're talking to you, it naturally draws in your attention. And if there's not much disturbance and you can hear their voices clearly, then you have time to think, you remember what they said, you can relate it to other things. You might even, if you in your head have because your listening goes so easy, you can even store some questions around that you want to ask after this person finished what he was saying or she was saying. However, if you're in a lecture theater where it's the reflections or the musical performance is so poor, you can't make these relationships. You won't remember what happened because you're so preoccupied. David Griesinger, in his studies about proximity, looked a lot at this effect, and it's very strong. It immediately is related to how our auditory system works, and I think it makes a lot of sense, because if you look probably from a evolutionary thing where we had to scan danger, anything that is in proximity that has a direct line of sight to us needs to be inspected when we don't. So we are directly tuned in far more to things that are direct and immediate, have this proximity factor to it. That has our attention. Now, and it doesn't cost much effort. When we are in a very crowded room with lots of reflections, a lot of people talking, other distractions, our auditory system becomes more overloaded, and it won't sound as pure. It will not sound direct. We're less engaged. We can't make cultural references. We can't relate it to our own experiences. The comedy factor drops. All of these things happen when we're overloaded. So David Griesinger in his research in proximity basically says there's two very important factors about something being immediate to us, and that is that the fundamentals with all the overtones, because when you hear something like this, hey, there might be both 400 hertz tones, the fundamental, but the overtones determine that this is fibrous wood and this is metal. And you tell that by the overtones, just as you can distinguish my A's from E's, because while both are maybe 150 hertz or whatever it is, the overtones determine the difference between the vowels. So the relationship between the fundamentals and the bouquet of overtones, we're hypersensitive to this. So when something is proximity, we have very little interference, and all those overtones and the fundamental, they're all in the same phase. They're all highly related. So when our hearing has this natural division in different frequencies, but when we hear four persons talking, we can tune into either one of those four if the acoustics allow it, and we'll marry up the overtones that belong to that fundamental for each person, and then we can tune into one, and that gets the priority. Something will grab our attention in one of those four conversations, and that's the one we follow. So that extraordinary capability we need for understanding speech, but also to detect the danger. Now, proximity is one of those things that allow us to more richly engage with something. So we're more engaged if the lecturer is direct in front of us. If we are at the back of the lecture theater and we have lots of reflections and other people talking around us, we won't remember anything from that lecture. In fact, we'll struggle to follow the whole conversation. So, coming back to the DHTs, do I find this effect of proximity more with the DHT? Yes, slightly, but I'm not seeing the immediate that much. Subtle microdynamics, yeah, absolutely, and nuance. We talked about it already. Directly here, this element is described as giving kind of see-through clarity. Now, that's to me equal to transparent, so I don't know why Chat GPT is repeating itself. That's a bit of fucking word salad. Excuse my language. And lifelike to tonality. Now, this, especially on vocals and accent, that I find the most remarkable thing, and that's also what I found in this amp. When I switched from indirectly heated to directly heated, and I had two tubes before indirectly heated, when I switched to the Type 47, and despite the shortcomings of the interstage transformer, there are a lot of instruments, especially pianos, suddenly started sounding like they had a personality, they had a timbre that was natural, like it just sounded completely right. And similar, this just album, and it's not spectacular sound quality, but Supertramp, the Crime of the Century, I was playing that record, and it just sounded completely right. It didn't, less reproduced. Yes, I can hear the problems in the recording and so on, but those are the problems in the recording. I can still hone into the music very easily. And with my new speaker, which has far more immediate qualities, so this lifelike tonality and natural timbre of instruments, that just it's indescribable, but it comes from make-believe to something that you can start enjoying like a real instrument. So if that's on your importance list, for me that is a huge thing about DHT. So spot on there, Chat GTP, that is something that comes in. So now, so I think we covered almost everything here. Do DHT make sense as a driver? So this depends a lot, because due to their low amplification factor, you often have to go to a 3-stage amp, and that, for example, why you could, if you could get away with an indirectly heated tube in a 2-stage amp, so indirectly heated drives the output tubes, and you can get away with 2 stages. With 3 stages, you have to do so many things completely right to make those 2 couplings and these 3 tubes work as well as a combination of 2. So, and that goes back to those rules from Thorsten Loesch. The simpler amp will normally do better. So that is what you have to weigh up when you're making a new amp. Is my component quality there? Can I stick with the simpler concept? And my practical advice for this is, because it's hard for your efficiency of speaker and the power that you need in your room and your listening habits and your preferences in what you find most engaging in music, and perhaps also movies, because you might use a system for movies. But the way you're gonna sort that out is only through experience, permutations on your system. So like I'm doing here, in the last week I had 3 different variations on that, and today or tomorrow I hope to do a 4th. It's a small topology change to get around my interstage limitations. So because then what you get is you get the experience of the difference, and you get the experience of these differences, these this difference between indirectly heated and directly heated, and you get the real world feel of what they do. So when you start designing a new, or you're drawing up new plans, you have a idea of the magnitudes and how they relate to your taste. So you have the technical facets versus your experience. And only by running through many permutations, or you find something like William does with me, is he uses my experience, or maybe you find another channel or another who is doing the same experience, and once you can relate to what they have done, and you do their experiment, and you say, hey, what this person does makes sense to me. So then you can surf on the back of their experience, and that will speed you up. So you will get their iterations that they've done, and you can absorb those knowledge. But they only really fall into place when you've done this stuff yourself, and you have some real world relatability to what they've done. And once you find that connection, that saves you time. That saves you, those iterations almost come for free. So you don't have the time and the cost expense of running all those experiments yourself. But that will really tell you which compromises work for you. And that's how brands have particular sounds. The good brands, where you have designers which have been personally responsible and invested into the quality of their amps, they'll have certain characteristics that you'll find back. And that's why people become fans of certain makers of amps. So yeah, that's this. Now, a very short word about this amp. I already described you when I moved from the 8532 to this say type 47 directly heated tube, which is a power tube as input tube. So couple of things that lifelike tonality and timbre and unique personality of instruments really came out. The other thing that it did is because of the lower plate resistance, the authority of these tubes. They're already highly dynamic, and they have the output transformer is amorphous. It's an amorphous Landau output transformer, but also with a very low winding ratio. That's why I'm using 2 tubes on each side, and these are highly similar. So that gives, combined with this tube, that enables them to be forcefully driven. So they're very credible in the way they present dynamics. And it's something that I struggled with before, but that is also part of using a very powerful tube to drive them. And it also uses an interstage, so it complies with a lot of factors that Thorsten Loesch said. So, for example, it's a simple amp because it's only 2 stages. Number 2 is there's very low grid to ground resistance because it's only 930 ohms to ground from the grid because of the interstage. Oh no, it's even less, 860 ohms. Number 3, it uses very linear devices. These are extremely linear. And also the type 47 in the range that it's being used is extremely linear. Also because of the interstage, of course, the load line is nearly flat. So very linear, very little loss in detail. And these, by the way, have a really nice geometry. It's actually an oval shaped plate. And number 4 is the low drive impedance, which I changed basically. So all these elements I've tried to incorporate in those 4 priorities that Thorsten Loesch had formulated. And I already worked with those principles, but it's here you can see it's coming back. So here I manage basically an all DHT amp. Even the rectifier tube is directly heated. I prefer that as well. Yeah, so is it perfect? No, because I'm actually running into a specific component that I need to replace. I use a shunt volume pot, so there's only 2 resistors in the signal part. There's an optional step up for very low level signals if I need it. So it's a very simple amp. And I found the change that I now did here from going from an indirectly heated tube to a directly heated tube is so significant, and I think I can expand on it by improving it further. So to me, yes, this was really worth it. So my experience is in this amp, because it made a difference despite some limitations, and I think that it can be even further improved. But so this is the living example of that whole story that we just went through. So anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for tuning in. If you find this type of content useful, and if you can spare a couple of dollars, please go to my Buy Me a Coffee and support this channel that way. It really helps and makes a difference. Thank you, William, for asking these questions. I hope this was a more in-depth, complete video. I think it's really targeted for people that are really interested in building their own things and what they should consider or buy even, because buying has the same principles. In the end, it's the design of the amp that you buy or make, doesn't matter, but the same principles apply. So thank you for tuning into my channel. I hope to catch you in the next video. Until then, have a great day, have a great week, enjoy the music, and I hope to catch you soon. All right, that's it for now. Signing off. Bye-bye.